Welcome back for another episode of Big Dawg Sports Unleashed. This is our final episode before the end of the 2025-2026 NFL season, and man, what a ride it's been. I would safely say that very few people thought either the Seahawks or the Patriots were going to be in the Super Bowl this year. Coming in, I thought that the NFC West could have three great teams in the Seahawks, Rams, and 49ers this season. Did I think that the Seahawks were going to be so good immediately that they'd be able to win the NFC? No. If they would have made the playoffs, sure. Maybe made the championship game, sure. I did think that their defense was definitely going to be a top 5 unit. I've known Mike McDonald is for real and is a fantastic defensive coach. I did not know that Jackson Smith-Njigba was going to have this much of a breakout, or that Clint Kubiak would be so successful and Sam Darnold would do a solid job this season to help get them there. Additionally, the Patriots, I believe that they were going to be successful. I thought that Mike Vrabel would be a good coach. Obviously, Drake May had a great rookie season, and they added some pieces that thought that they may be able to improve or maybe be winners this year. But getting the number 2 seed and making it to the Super Bowl, both of these blew it out of the water. So I find that exciting. I think it's a lot better when we have so much parity that teams that were seen as potentially middle of the pack, or Patriots who've been well below the middle of the pack, can ascend that quickly and make it to the Super Bowl. I think that's the most fascinating when so many teams are in it. I mean, that's one of the great strengths of the NFL, is that there is such great competitive balance. Sure, there are a few really bad owners and some teams that go on bad runs, but one great coaching hire, one great quarterback, or a few years of good drafting can totally flip that. And so definitely a surprising matchup if we would have suggested at the beginning of the season, but we've been watching these teams play for a while. Since the middle of the year, it's been clear that these two teams had significant potential. The Seahawks defense was dominant throughout nearly the entire regular season. They continued to look that way through most of the playoffs, although the Rams were able to put up a bunch of points on them this past week when, they put up 27 points on the Seahawks defense in Seattle, which is certainly more than they've been surrendering lately. So, in this week's episode, this is what we're going to cover. We're going to do a brief preview of the Super Bowl matchup and a few betting lines and the main storylines coming into it from across the league and from a Niner fan perspective. We are then also going to talk about a few other things. Bill Belichick, not in the Hall of Fame in round 1 of the voting, so we'll have to discuss why that is and what we think about it. Additionally, we'll spend a little bit of time dissecting the 2 championship games and our core takeaways from there, in both the Seahawks defeating the Rams 31-27 and the Patriots defeating the Broncos 10-7. That wasn't too exciting. Shocker. Their blizzard came for the second half, and there's 3 points scored in the entire second half. So not the most exciting one there, but the Seahawks-Rams game lived up to what we were expecting with a 31-27 close game to the end, and both teams retaking leads. That was certainly an exciting game that we'll spend some time recapping. Then additionally, we'll go over all of the big coaching changes that have happened lately. All 10 head coach vacancies have been filled now. A lot of coordinators have been moving around. So emotions flaring, some new general managers, all the above. So we'll talk about the impacts of those, and that'll wrap up our episode. To get started, the 2 main storylines, if you're a 49er fan, you're thinking, who do I root for here in the Super Bowl? You got the Seattle Seahawks, a divisional rival who have 1 career Super Bowl title. This matchup is a rematch of what has been, I'd say, in the 21st century, of the 26 Super Bowls we've had so far. The Seahawks-Patriots Super Bowl from a dozen years ago is absolutely one of the most memorable, and that was because the Seahawks were on the doorstep. They were inside the 5-yard line at the end of the game, and all they had to do was get in the end zone, and they were going to win the Super Bowl. That would be the second Super Bowl in the Pete Carroll and Legion of Boom era, and Russell Wilson's run there that was absolutely dominant. And they had Marshawn Lynch, one of the best backs in the game, and a great between the tackles physical runner, very hard to bring down. And what happens? They pass the ball and they try and throw it to a practice squad level receiver, and Malcolm Butler gets the interception, his first career interception for the Patriots, and then it comes out the Patriots have practiced that play exactly for it, and you got Tom Brady and Jimmy G and Josh McDaniels jumping up on the sideline. Can't believe it. They had like a 1-2% chance to win. So can the Seahawks, avenge that? Obviously, it's a new coach. It's a whole new team, but that's the same franchise that in the fan base that had that loss of choking a Super Bowl and getting their second ring. They only have one. They've lost 2 Super Bowls. They've won 1 Super Bowl. So big game for Mike Macdonald. It's so hard to win the Super Bowl, and we see with the NFL how quickly coaches can fall out of favor. 10 of the 32 head coaches were fired or their jobs were open this offseason. That is an enormous amount. All these coaches are getting pulled from everywhere else. We just found out the Seahawks are going to lose their offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, after this game to be the head coach of the Raiders. The Niners have continued to lose coordinators. All these teams are losing coordinators, sometimes both, year in and year out, and that makes it extremely hard to repeat in the NFL. And just because you get there, it's not the same as winning it. But once you've won it, the pedigree added, especially as a coach, to your resume, changes things forever. It extends your leash. It extends the view that everyone has of you for future job opportunities. So can Mike Macdonald get the job done and put himself in the upper echelon of head coaches in year 2 in the Seattle regime? And likewise, can Mike Vrabel add himself to Patriots history? What the Patriots are playing for is to be considered the greatest franchise in the history of the NFL now. Are they as old as some of the other franchises? No, but they are tied with the Pittsburgh Steelers for the most Super Bowl wins of any NFL franchise. Out of 32, they have 6 Super Bowl wins. The Steelers have 6 Super Bowl wins. Those are the only 2 teams with 6. And so if the Patriots win this, they will get their 7th Super Bowl win, all in the 21st century, and that would then give them the upper hand for the greatest team in NFL history, leading the most Super Bowls. Like, what more can you ask for than that? So, big game on the line for the Patriots to cement themselves as the most successful team in the NFL over the Super Bowl era, and for the Seahawks to cement themselves as a special defense that got the job done all the way throughout the season. Mike Macdonald is the second-year head coach, getting a Super Bowl ring under his belt, and them avenging a previous Super Bowl choke to the New England Patriots to finally get their second ring. And it's so big to get that job done, as we see with many other coaches. The Eagles loved Andy Reid still. They didn't think he was a bad coach. They still knew he could win the Super Bowl, but it's just sometimes when you're long enough there and you haven't gotten it done, teams need a change, and oftentimes that person needs the change of environment or that spark of being fired in order to personally evolve to get to that opportunity of winning it. I'm sure Jeffrey Lurie and the Eagles aren't surprised that Andy Reid went on to win multiple Super Bowls with the Chiefs, but still, it was time for them to make a change in Philadelphia. Could that be the case for the Niners in a couple of years with Kyle Shanahan, highly heralded as universally a top 10 coach of the NFL, a top 3 offensive mind? Everyone talks about, oh, you can't fire him because he'd get a job in 10 seconds. That may be true, but how many seasons can you go with these crazy amount of injuries and with losing multiple Super Bowls that you had leads in the fourth quarter? 1 with Atlanta and 2 with the 49ers, all leading in the fourth quarter and not getting the job done. Huge job for Mike Macdonald to get that job done, to finish off the season. The Seahawks are 4.5-point favorites. They've been dominant for a while. Their defense has been absolutely overwhelming. We'll talk about that later in a little recap of their game against the Rams. They've been a little too overwhelming, in my opinion. They're losing their cool in this, like, the nonstop celebrating and the shit talking and the getting in your face and committing penalties. And so, but it's working so far, and the Rams are able to overcome it, but not enough to win the game. So, big legacy game for both of those teams. So before we break down those championship games, one of the biggest headlines of this week in NFL news has been, it was announced that Bill Belichick, in his first year of eligibility for the Hall of Fame, this is 6-time Super Bowl champion with the New England Patriots head coach, Bill Belichick, and also won 2 championships as defensive coordinator of the New York Giants. Prior to that, working under Bill Parcells, is not making it into the Hall of Fame in year 1. Initial reactions to that was, I was surprised. I thought he would be in because his resume speaks for itself. But all this uproar over, we need to change, I don't think it's that big of a deal personally, for a couple reasons. One, my first thought after that was Terrell Owens. Terrell Owens is undoubtedly a top 5 wide receiver of all time, and he was not a first ballot Hall of Famer purely because of just like writer contempt, basically, and things about his antics in the game. He did a lot of celebrations. He was known for pulling the Sharpie out and signing the ball. He got the popcorn. He ran to the star in the middle of the field. He had some pretty emotional and intense interview situations. But despite all that, he's up there in the top 5 in receiving touchdowns and and in yards. So undebatably one of the best wide receivers of all time, probably a starting wide receiver on the NFL's all-time great team, yet he didn't make it in. So that was my first thought, was T.O., there's precedent here. My second thought was he got in trouble for multiple cheating scandals. There was Spygate, where they were illegally, against the NFL's rules, taping other teams' practices in order to get an unfair advantage. And they also got Tom Brady suspended for 4 games for Deflategate. Do I think either of those are such horrible things that he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame? Do I think we should start taking after the trash, terrible, unforgivable, pointless MLB Hall of Fame and keeping out the greatest of all time for stupid ass fucking assessments of steroids that, they put the commissioner Bud Selig in and he was over the steroid era. They love the steroid era. They just want to demonize the players that took the steroids, even though half the fucking league was taking them. No, I'm not trying to get like the MLB Hall of Fame, but I would say there is something to first ballot being extra special and the icing on the cake and the ultimate compliment and all of that. And although obviously his 6 Super Bowl titles as a head coach and 2 as a defensive coordinator would warrant that alone, the fact that he has been in charge behind 2 different cheating scandals that led to significant suspensions, fines, all of the above, I don't really care that Bill Belichick doesn't get in. And the other reason is because, one, he will definitely get in next season, if not in due time. He's not going to take 5+ years to get in. There's no doubt about it that he's going to get in. He's probably going to be in next year. So, oh well, who cares if you have to wait 1 more year? Don't get caught cheating twice if it's that important to you to go in on the soonest fucking date that you have to go in. 2, and more importantly, that explains this situation, is the structure of the voting. And that is that there are a limited number of votes, and voting for him means you can't vote for other players that likely won't be on the ballot again or won't have the same guaranteed admission or likelihood that Bill Belichick has. So, for example, there were 5 people that could be voted for in this round of the voting. There are 50 voters, and each voter can only vote for 3. And to get in, you needed 40 of the 50 votes. So right there, that's just a process that doesn't necessarily yield that result. So voting for Bill Belichick is one thing, but Bill Belichick's definitely going to get in. He's going to get in next season, almost certainly, undoubtedly soon regardless. There's no doubt that he's going to get in, that he's going to keep being on the ballot. His resume is so over the top that it's obvious he will get in and that he's a Hall of Famer. But some of these other players on the ballot may never get the opportunity to go in again. And these are guys that have waited 20+ years after they've been retired already. Bill Belichick's not even retired. He's still the head coach of UNC right now. Although he's old, he's not so old that you're thinking he's going to die anytime soon or that he's been waiting forever. And by voting for Bill Belichick, that means you're not voting for one of these 3 players, all of which are deserving for the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. That's between Ken Anderson, Roger Craig, and L.C. Greenwood. And you may say, okay, those names aren't as legit as Bill Belichick. I agree. But again, Bill Belichick's going to get in. No one's doubting his Hall of Fame resume. But these dudes may never get a chance to be a finalist again. So if you believe that all 5 of these guys, with Robert Kraft, the owner of the Patriots, in there as well, are worthy of being in the Hall of Fame, there's no doubt that Kraft's going to be back. There's no doubt that Bill Belichick's going to be back. There's no doubt that they're going to get in. They're the owner over the most Super Bowls in the history of any franchise and the head coach with 6 Super Bowl and 2 as a defensive coordinator. They're getting in for sure. But Ken Anderson, Roger Craig, and L.C. Greenwood may never get an opportunity again. These guys have been waiting for 25+ years, and they are, in many people's eyes, legitimate Hall of Famers as well. So would you, if you could only vote for 3 of them and you believe all 5 of them are Hall of Famers, would you vote for Bill Belichick knowing that he's going to get in next year or really soon regardless, knowing that Kraft's going to get in for sure? Would you vote for them, or would you vote for the other guy you think's a Hall of Famer, who this may be his final chance ever, who's been waiting for dozens of years and may be on his deathbed soon to get in instead? And that's where I agree. Roger Craig deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, no doubt. He is one of the best Niners ever. And he was a huge part of the Niners dynasty of what some consider to be the greatest team in NFL history when the Niners won back-to-back Super Bowls in 88 and 89. And he was the star running back for them. He was the first person to put up the 1,000 season, decade plus before Marshall Faulk ever did it, and then decades before Christian McCaffrey ever did it. He was the original great running back that was also a great receiver, and the Bill Walsh scheme that's now taken over NFL offenses still 40 years later. So that's the number one argument, is that Bill's going to get in, and these guys may never have another shot, and you think they're Hall of Famers. They've been waiting forever, so give your vote to them because they're also deserving, and Bill's not going to have to wait long anyway. And in that case, if I was a voter, I could absolutely see that. So if you have a problem with that, then you either need to, one, argue that these guys that have waited dozens of years do not deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, which is possible. Maybe you feel that way looking at their careers. They don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. Okay. Or two, that if they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, that the voting process is problematic, and that may be the case. It may be switched now because there's been such a media uproar about Bill Belichick, and he's such a clear, resume guy that's got to be in the Hall of Fame that excluding him brings up a lot of questions, and that may be deservingly so. But I wouldn't hate on any of the voters who didn't pick him. I would say, keeping him out year one for Spygate and Deflategate, that's reasonable, but his resume is so dope that I don't think it's necessary. I do think it's kind of funny, and I do think it's just in some ways that he was punished for that, and he's still going to get into the Hall of Fame regardless. But more importantly, it's a vote to not get one of these other dudes in who may never have another chance and who's been waiting decades and decades longer than Bill Belichick. So in that case, I understand where the voters are at, and if you have a problem with that, then you should probably change the voting criteria so that a vote for Bill Belichick doesn't mean you can't vote for Roger Craig or L.C. Greenwood or Ken Anderson to get in the Hall of Fame, because those guys may be their last shot. So now that we've covered our hot Bill Belichick takes of how it's not a big deal that he's not voted into the Hall of Fame, and that I agree with voters of giving those other guys opportunities, especially Roger Craig, in my opinion, who's one of the most underrated offensive players in NFL history and a huge part of dynasties, and the trend that the game has gotten to of running backs being receivers, versatility, that's to me, if I probably would have gone Bill Belichick, Robert Kraft, and Roger Craig, but L.C. Greenwood had a fantastic career as well, the former Steelers defensive end, and I don't know a ton about Ken Anderson, but if I looked into it, I might be sympathetic to his cause as well. So no shame to me on these voters. It's clear Bill's going to get in, and if he has to wait a year, oh well. Don't fucking cheat, and then, maybe you wouldn't be slighted like T.O. was, who was not ever known for cheating or who never got any off-the-field issues. It was all just weird antics with Terrell Owens, who had to wait his years to get in. He has just as dope of a player wide receiver resume as Bill Belichick does a coaching one. Third all-time in wins, third all-time in yards and touchdowns when he retired. So our takeaways from the championship games. The big game was the NFC West Showdown, match 3 that had been split before, the Los Angeles Rams at the Seattle Seahawks, and boy was that game exciting. The takeaway is the Seahawks D is impressive, but they are gettable. They had somehow dominated the 49ers twice. That was a poor offensive line that were dominated. That's impressive. They deserve all the credit in the world for doing that, but those were examples of where they got so ahead and got so kind of lucky with the Rashid Shaheed touchdown and a couple other calls that went their way that they were able to just kind of end that game early. With the Rams, it was clear they were never going to be able to do that. Matt Stafford and that offensive line and those two elite number one wide receivers were never going to let that happen. So the D still look great, but they are gettable. Can Drake May and his line be good enough to take advantage of that? We'll see. They had a very balanced attack. They had solid special teams. They had solid defense. And Sam Darnold, one of our big takeaways, Sam Darnold played the best game of his pro career. And I'm not a hater in the sense that I'm rooting against Sam Darnold or that I think he's horrible, but obviously I've spent plenty of time calling out how I think he's a liability of their team, how I think he's an average quarterback at best that's been carried by a great defense and a good offensive coordinator, and I still feel that way. But I can tell you this much, he stepped up in what was the biggest game of his life, and he was not a liability in that game, and he was not carried by them in that game. He was able to connect for his best statistical game in quite a while. Sam Darnold has 25 for 36, extremely high completion percentage, for 346 yards, which is almost 10 yards per attempt, and 3 touchdown passes, and more importantly, 0 turnovers. He had the 3+ touchdowns and the 0 turnovers, and if you told me that he had those stats, as I said last episode, I knew that the Seahawks would win. I just didn't think it was possible or likely that he was going to have both of those things. I figured if he had 0 turnovers, he's going to have 0 to 2 touchdowns. But he balled out, and that game was still extremely close. most importantly, something that I don't want to get missed is the Seahawks got their defensive stand on the Rams with around 5 and change left in the game on a 4th and goal. Sam Darnold was then able to run out that clock, which is something that a lot of quarterbacks, a lot of offense, a lot of teams aren't able to do, but they got a handful of first downs. They kept converting, and Sam Darnold was clutch in that regard. And they had multiple times where they're just trying to run out the clock, where running the ball is absolutely the play. You can't pass it unless it works. And they did that 2 different times. And one time it worked and Sam Darnold was able to roll out and complete a huge pass. And the other time they drew a penalty, so it ended up working. So those were kind of balls of steel from Clint Kubiak on those. And Darnold was able to execute on them when it was a clear running down, risky to stop the clock, potentially give the ball back or make a gaffe. And they did it, and they played to win the game, and Darnold played plenty well. So aggressive play calling from Clint Kubiak, and Darnold was able to cash the check. So that's one of the big takeaways. Sam Darnold had the game of his life. Do I think that means that he's a top 15 quarterback in the NFL? No, I don't. But it does mean to me that if he could have another game, not even as good as that, but again, 0 turnovers, 2+ touchdowns, that he can win the Super Bowl. And that's ultimately what matters. Is a quarterback good enough to win the Super Bowl? And there's at least 20 guys good enough to win a Super Bowl if you have an elite special dominating defense and great coaching and some luck on your side. And there's no doubt he's good enough to win the Super Bowl. It's just the better the quarterback is, the higher the chance that they can help make that happen. And in this game, if Sam Darnold plays above average, if he plays as an asset to his team, they're rarely ever going to lose because of how much help he has with JSN and their elite defense and coaching. But as I said, the Seahawks defense, they've been playing uber aggressive, but they've been getting away with a lot of penalties. They're very grabby, and that's fine. When you're shutting them down, it's okay for the refs to, not call close penalties, to only call the egregious ones. You get the benefit of the doubt. It's kind of like a pitcher in baseball that's painting the zone. If there's corner pitches, you can get some pitcher strikes because you showed you're in command of the zone. You've showed that you're playing great, so you deserve some benefit of the doubt on the 50-50 ones. But they've been getting the benefit of the doubt there for a while and not getting called on as many defensive penalties as I felt that they warranted. That doesn't mean they're not playing great. It means they're also getting some help from the referees to keep sustaining that. They also have been crazy shit talking and not getting back to the huddle and focused after plays, was calling that out early in the game, and then they get a potentially back-breaking penalty from Reek Woolen, who is on the wrong sideline after a play where they got to stop on 3rd down, being an absolute clown, and ended up costing them big in that scenario, giving the Rams a free first down for him just being an immature bonehead. So he's definitely a bonehead of the week with that terrible. It's one thing to talk shit on the field, and if you're a DB getting the wide receiver's head, I'm all for that. But if you're after the play having to run your mouth and say, look at me for fucking dozens of seconds on the other sideline, costing your team a chance to go to the Super Bowl potentially because of you just like having to tell the world that you're all that, like, that's fucking some absolute classic bonehead behavior. Woolen got called for that and was deservingly so. So both things can be true. They've been getting lucky on some calls. They're a little over-aggressive with some grabs, and they're also the second best defense in the NFL. The Texans this year, they're number 1 in points per game, and a special defense that deserves to be remembered if they can win this one more game as one of the top defenses to pull off winning the Super Bowl. The biggest play for me, the other bonehead of the week we got to call out, is the referees. And in the NFL, for their necessary rule change that needs to come. And this was earlier in the game, but the Rams lose by 4. And early in the game, on 3rd down, in the red zone, Matt Stafford gets taken down with a face mask on 3rd down in the red zone, and it's not called. And I get if it's like a little hands to the face, but you're not grabbing or you're not yanking. No, this was absolutely, undoubtedly, even fucking any crazy idiots could not doubt that this was a face mask. And this gets to a big play in the game, because that's then the Rams basically being first and goal, almost certainly going to score a touchdown, and that's 4 more points on the board, and they lost by 4. And this isn't like, oh, it was holding, not holding, or pass interference, not pass interference. There's no fucking doubt on a face mask. He grabbed his fucking face mask and he fucking pulled his face mask. And it's one thing if it's on a random player, but this is the quarterback who has the ball. That cannot be missed. And more importantly, that is something that has to be challengeable by the NFL, especially in these playoff games. What's the hurt on that? you should be able to challenge if there is a face mask on the ball carrier, because that is absolutely definitive. It is not a judgmental call like holding or like pass interference or like other things. It is clear. Did they grab the face mask with their fingers and pull it or not? If they did, you should be able to throw the penalty and you should be able to challenge that when it's on the ball carrier and when it's clear on camera that it was a face mask. And if they did that, the Rams would have scored a touchdown there. That would have significantly changed the game, and they probably would have gotten the amount of points that were the difference in the game, which changes how they're behaving in those late game scenarios. So that was a terrible call and unforgivable in that regard. You can't miss that. The NFL needs to make a rule change this offseason to allow face mask on the ball carrier to be a challengeable and reviewable play. It's that simple. You don't need to do it for all 22 dudes on the field, but the ball carrier alone, you will have good enough camera angles on that. And if it's not clear that he grabs it, okay, say it stands. That's fine. But it's basically the easiest thing to review ever and a 100% certain call every single time. So that needs to be changed. That cost the Rams big in this game. Was a huge advantage of luck and bullshit that went the Seahawks' way. And I was rooting for the Seahawks. I'm not hating on that. I don't want the Rams to win another Super Bowl. I want the game to be clean and officiated fairly and them to earn it. And that was the biggest sour note for me in this game. The other huge point in this game was not on the referees, however. The Rams continue to have special teams mistakes, and their punt returner literally fumbled a ball that was unforced. It was right to him, and he slips and loses the ball and gives the Seahawks a free turnover. And that's something that is just a nightmare as a fan who was at the NFC Championship game of the Niners versus the Giants in 2011 with Kyle Williams having to come in and play punt returner for the league's best returner in Ted Ginn, because Greg Williams and his bounty gate and Sean Payton's bounty gate took out Ted Ginn the week before. Kyle Williams fumbles 3 times, 2 on punt returns, loses the championship game in overtime in Jim Harbaugh's first year for the 49ers. I know how much it hurts to see punt return fumbles. This was unforced. This wasn't like, okay, he's running and there's fast guys and they knocked it out or punched it out. This dude just couldn't catch the ball, and that is just the worst to see if that's your team. Have unforced turnovers in a key playoff game that lead to huge swings. And so that was a huge gaffe on the Rams' part. And so that was the other big play of the game. So we got our boneheads, the referees who did not call an obvious fucking face mask. The NFL for not allowing you to challenge a face mask on the fucking quarterback that's changing the results potentially in NFC Championship games. The Rams punt returner who unforced fumbled a huge punt in the NFC Championship game in which his team lost by a possession. Of course, Reek Woolen in his absolute nonsense, look at me, unsportsmanlike conduct penalty that led to the Rams getting the ball back after they'd stopped them on 3rd down, which is the most avoidable thing of all time. So those are our boneheads of the week. As far as our stars of the week, definitely got to have Sam Darnold in there. As we mentioned, Matt Stafford, you could put him in there too, but he lost, so, honorable mention. But 374 and 3 touchdowns. Sam Darnold, 346 and 3 touchdowns. This was a fun game to watch. There was a lot of offense. There were still defensive plays being made, but the offenses were the strength of this game, which made it really fun. Kenneth Walker's also been balling out, but above him, the other star with Sam Darnold is Jackson Smith-Njigba, because honestly, Sam Darnold made some great throws. The early throw deep down the right sideline to Rashid Shaheed was his first completion, I believe, of the day, and that was a fantastic throw and showed right away, okay, he's ready to make some plays that likely gave him a lot of confidence to continue playing well in that game. But Jackson Smith-Njigba was getting wide the fuck open for a lot of the game, and he had 10 for 153 and a touchdown. And again, Puka balls out, 9 for 165 and a touchdown. And another pass deflection where Stafford throws a pick in a playoff game and Puka gets his hand between and rips it out. So his defense has been wild. That's 2 of those in 3 postseason games. So those are our main takeaways from the Rams-Seahawks NFC Championship game, where Seahawks won 31-27 to now go to Levi's Stadium, and they are 4.5 point favorites over the New England Patriots in the Super Bowl. But one stat I saw this week preparing for the episode is 5 straight Super Bowls, the underdog has covered the spread. Oh, Niners storyline here. Who do you root for here? The Niners have 5 Super Bowls, and yes, they have not won one in 31 years now. So it's been a while. They've lost 3 in that span, all of which were extremely close, coming down to the wire in the 4th quarter. I would say 1 play away in all of those games. Certainly the overtime game against the Chiefs, and certainly with the Kaepernick 3 straight incompletions to Crabtree in the end zone. The other Chiefs game, they ended up losing by 10, but they were certainly, the Jimmy G play to Emmanuel Sanders, or, not giving up the 3rd and 16 to Tyreek Hill. So the Niners have been, but the quest for 6 is still a work in progress. The Niners have 5 Super Bowl titles. Also, the Dallas Cowboys have 5 Super Bowl titles, who have not been back to the NFC Championship game in 30 years, by far the longest streak of any team in the NFC. So the one side, the Niners, if they win the Super Bowl and, the Patriots lose this one, they're now tied for the most Super Bowls in NFL history, which could make them debatably the greatest franchise in NFL history. So that's one reason not to root for the Patriots, because that gives them a gap between the Niners winning 1 and tying them, and instead the Patriots getting to 7 and the Niners being a couple away. But the reason to root for against the Seahawks, in my opinion, is stronger for multiple reasons. 1, they're your division rivals. Don't want to see them succeed in general. 2, they just embarrass you multiple times, so don't want to see them now celebrating and think they're all that. But more importantly, for the future of their regime, as we see with coaches that can't quite win the Super Bowl in, say the Bengals and the 49ers, and it's hard to get back there. And the last thing we want to do is have them have all the confidence in the world. We want them to be like they didn't finish the job and they're trying to get back, and have more pressure on both their players and on their fans, head coach, rather than the security that comes along with winning the Super Bowl and the confidence that comes along with winning the Super Bowl. So I'm definitely rooting for the Patriots in this game. I don't feel great about it. I don't love it. They're not a team that I would want to win more than, probably 20 plus teams in the league I'd rather win than the Patriots, but I like to root for them. I love seeing Vrabel succeed. He's who I knew was a great coach, and obviously knew Tennessee were the clowns in that situation. Drake May seems pretty easy to root for. Other than, his low playoff games, he's had a fantastic season, and he's in the Super Bowl in year 2. So Josh McDaniels, this is his 10th Super Bowl as well, being, in a coaching in 10 of the 60 Super Bowls in NFL history. How's that for Josh McDaniels? That, you rarely see coaches make the Hall of Fame that aren't head coaches and aren't the best coaches and don't have normally multiple Super Bowls or like top 5 wins all time. But Josh McDaniels is going to make a case for being in the Hall of Fame purely for being an offensive coordinator and contributor. If he ends up winning 7, 8 rings and goes to double-digit Super Bowls as a key coach, winning most of them, that's absolutely astounding. Obviously, we talked in the past about Steve Spagnuolo now being the DC of 4 different Super Bowls victories. That's another one, but that's pretty rare to get that consideration. But Josh McDaniels has gotten there. Terrible head coach, but one of the most successful offensive coordinators of all time. So the Patriots get to the Super Bowl by beating the Broncos 10-7. The first half was pretty normal. The second half was a blizzard. There were 3 points in the entire second half, and that was the difference in the game. The Broncos got off to an early 7-0 lead, getting a touchdown to Courtland Sutton. This is, again, not with Bo Nixon there because he hurt his ankle the week before in the second to last play, and they have Jared Stidham in there. He gets the touchdown early to Courtland Sutton. Then, still in the first half, the Broncos are inside the red zone, and they have a chance to kick a field goal that's all but automatic and get up 10-0 early. And for me, the reason you take that is because you don't have your starting quarterback right now. If you have a dual threat starting quarterback who's top half in the league, by all means, go for it on short 4th downs. Makes more sense. You're very confident in their accuracy, in their processing and decision making, and or their dual threat, so they could run, which opens up the playbook a ton and forces the defense to respect the quarterback to maybe open up other things. But when you have a backup quarterback in there, being risky and gambling doesn't make fucking sense because you're not going to convert at the same level. And so I thought that was a terrible call from Sean Payton. I thought it was over aggressive when your goal should be getting some scoring drives in this game with a backup quarterback and playing great defense. So a chance to take a 2-score lead early in the game, get points on the board, have it considered a successful drive, take some pressure off Stidham, and instead he gambles and it backfires, and the Broncos will never score again in this game. 7 points, is all they ended up getting. The Patriots matched that with a touchdown in the second quarter to go into the half 7-7, and then a blizzard took over. You can't see the yard lines in the game, can't open your fucking eyes barely if you're, at the game, and it was cold and windy, and there was only 3 points scored in the second half. There were a few field goals missed in these bad conditions, field goals missed from both teams, and the Patriots got the game-winning field goal in the third quarter. Andres Borregales was 1 for 3 on field goals, and he only made a 23-yarder. But that was all they needed to win the game, and that gave them the lead in the AFC Championship game in the second half, and no one scored again after that because they were in a blizzard. So knowing the forecast, which I would expect he has the ability to know, especially as the home coach in the game, Sean Payton should have taken the points. We'll throw him into our bonehead of the week too. And so you got a backup quarterback, dude. It's one thing. If you got Matt Stafford, sure, fucking go for it on fourth down. Maybe it'll backfire, okay. But at least you're like, okay, we have 2 number 1 wide receivers and an elite all-time great quarterback. Makes sense. Or you have a great dual threat quarterback, Lamar Jackson, something like that. But going for it with Jared Stidham just seemed unnecessarily aggressive, and you're not playing to the strength of your team. The strength of your team is your defense. You know that you don't have a great running game and you don't have your starting quarterback. Take points on the board, take a 2-score lead, and give your defense some ammo and your offense some confidence. Big mistake by Sean Payton. The Broncos never score again. They lose 10-7 in a blizzard game. Not very exciting, especially compared to the other game. But, a win is a win, and the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, and they're 1 win away from completing an absolute, I wouldn't say miracle season, but a comeback season of the ages if they go from a first-year head coach with this team who'd recently been fired and Mike Vrabel winning the Super Bowl. He'd also be the first coach ever to win the Super Bowl as a head coach after having won the Super Bowl as a player on that same team, which that's fucking dope. And so 1 win away, and yes, the Seahawks should be favored because Sam Darnold looked great, but more importantly, their defense has been the biggest strength of either team. Their defense is obviously better than their offense, and their defense is stronger than either the Patriots defense or offense. Patriots offense has struggled in the postseason thus far. Granted, they played the Texans and Broncos defenses on the road, so that kind of makes sense. But either way, the Patriots should be underdogs in this game, but there's no doubt that it could be a game and they could have a much better performance than they have on offense in the past. They could also do a great job defending against Sam Darnold. And as we mentioned, the last 5 underdogs have all covered the spread. So the Seahawks are 4.5-point favorites in this game, and they've had the stronger resume coming in. They beat better teams to get here, and they've won more games handily in the recent history. They got the strength in their defense and Coach Mike McDonald, but now the pressure's on them, and so we'll see. But yeah, pretty shitty AFC Championship game, bonehead move from Sean Payton, and then a lack of offense, bunch of missed kicks in a blizzard. The NFC game was an all-time classic shootout between 2 great teams and rivals, and so we're set with our Super Bowl matchup now. Drake May had only 85 passing yards in that game. But if that wasn't a blizzard, then I'd probably be calling that out as a reason why the Seahawks are going to roll them. But when you have the lead or when you're tied and you're the favored team because of the Jared Stidham backup quarterback and because of the storm, you don't need, all you got to do is win the game. I don't really care about stats other than turnovers in a championship game because all you got to do is win the game. But 86 passing yards is super low. He did also have 65 rushing yards and their touchdown in the game. So that's enough right there to earn the respect right back from Drake May. Another thought that came up from this game, we had some players come out recently and say, defensive players, that intentional grounding should be counted as a sack. And I completely agree. That seems like a no-brainer. I've advocated for some other rule changes. Obviously, we've heard how passionate, I am about the face mask that affected the NFC Championship game is easily fixable. It's not one that's going to take a lot of time. It's not one that's subjective. That should be fixed. But another one, intentional grounding being a sack for the defensive player makes complete sense for me. If you're calling intentional grounding, that's exactly what it means. They were going to sack them, but instead they broke the rules to avoid it. No brainer. That should be added as sacks. I don't really care how it affects records and all that because those dudes deserve the credit for their great plays, and that affects their contracts and their Hall of Fame chances and things like that. And those are plays worthy of being recognized for the defensive player and not just as a mistake by the offensive player. So our final topic of this episode are all the coaching changes across the league. We've had all of them filled now. We had 10 head coach vacancies. We covered most of them, but there's been a few more hires since we've last talked. Atlanta hired a new GM, and they got a guy from Chicago, Ian Cunningham, and he is African American, and so many were talking about how the Bears, are likely to get the 2 third-round picks from getting, minorities swooped to other teams hired. Turns out the Bears are not likely to get those picks because technically he was an assistant GM there, and he's becoming the general manager in Atlanta. But because they just hired Matt Ryan to be their president of football operations, he's technically the lead guy there. He's the one making the calls. The general manager isn't the last. They're not making the ultimate draft and free agency choices. Matt Ryan will have that power. So ultimately, it's not truly a promotion in that sense if he's still the second-hand guy to the guy making the decision. So we'll see how that plays out. But all he basically did is just get a slightly better title, but has basically the same amount of power. So we'll see how that plays out. But that would be a huge loss for the Bears if they lose one of their main front office guys and don't get any compensation that they could get, because 2 third-round picks is a lot. Add multiple great prospects or for trade value. So that would be a big bummer for the Bears if they do not get that. Cleveland hired Todd Monken, who had been the offensive coordinator for Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh in Baltimore. That was a big surprise to Jim Schwartz, who has led a great defensive unit there for the last few years and has previous head coaching experience in the early 2010s with the Detroit Lions, with the famous handshake feud with Jim Harbaugh when they were both 4-5-0 and the Niners beat the Lions, and Harbaugh kind of stiffed him at the end of the game, just went for a quick, not really looking at him shake, and turned away. And then Jim Schwartz chased after him, all feuding. He's always had kind of like a reputation after that for maybe not being the most popular guy or the most collected head coach. But despite that, everyone respects him as being a top 10 defensive coordinator in the NFL. He's had great units most of the years in Cleveland, despite being in Cleveland that's have the worst offense in the NFL, literally the worst offense in the NFL multiple times in the last 5 years, and the worst ownership and terrible front office and horrible contracts and all of that. He's done a great job with rookies. He's done a great job, obviously, with Myles Garrett. So he thought he was going to be the head coach of the Browns. He wanted to be the head coach of the Browns, and they spurned him for Todd Monken and were hoping that he would stay because he's under contract. But all reports came out that Jim Schwartz was, all but devastated, was emotional, and was saying goodbyes to everyone and making it clear that he was not going to fucking return to them because he thought he deserved to be the head coach, and they picked someone else. So we'll see where he lands as a DC. I believe he is still under contract in Cleveland, so I don't know if it's going to take them getting trade compensation for someone to get him, or if they're going to cut him loose after he throws a fit and refuses to honor his contract and keep coaching for him. I don't know how they're going to handle that, probably poorly, because that would be classic Browns. Buffalo got their new head coach. They promoted offensive coordinator Joe Brady. Interesting that they threw Sean McDermott under the bus for losing the game when they lost because they had 5 turnovers, and Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator. So, that doesn't make a ton of sense there. But we already talked last week about how Terry Bagula was one of the biggest boneheads of the whole fucking season with how he handled that press conference of throwing current players and previous head coaches under the bus. So they promote offensive coordinator Joe Brady. He seems like a great offensive mind, and that's good for the continuity of the offense. Should probably get like any fucking wide receivers on that team if, they don't want to just fire him and blame him in a couple of years. But interesting move there to promote him after they already promoted their GM, Brandon Beane, to president or whatever title he got. So interesting in-house move there from Buffalo. Denver fired offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi. Interesting because he's been with Sean Payton for many years, and also because they made the AFC Championship game and had their backup quarterback and only lost by 3. So that just shows you how tough it is to be a coach or a coordinator and head coach in the NFL these days. There's just so many getting fired all the time. This dude helped them get to the AFC Championship game and only lose by 3 with a backup quarterback, and now he's out of his job. So Joe Lombardi is available for other teams to swoop should they want to. And brutal turnover in this league. I don't know what more you can do than that, but I guess you have to win the Super Bowl to keep your job. Robert Saleh lands Brian Daboll as his offensive coordinator in Tennessee, which I think is a great hire for him. One, because he was the offensive coordinator that helped develop Josh Allen. Two, because he has head coach and offensive coordinator experience. So hopefully he can help Cam Ward develop. It's nice for Saleh to have someone that he can really trust with that entire side of the ball. I mean, he at least has a legitimate pedigree in the league as a great offensive coach. So that's a good hire for him. And then likewise, he just hired a defensive coordinator who's coming from the 49ers with him. And that was who was considered to be the front runner to replace Robert Saleh in San Francisco as a defensive coordinator. That was Gus Bradley, who was the original defensive coordinator of the Legion of Boom Seattle defense back in the early 2010s, and he then channeled that into being an unsuccessful head coach of the Jaguars. Later got fired as being the defensive coordinator of the Colts. He's been with the Niners the last year, was their assistant head coach, and Robert Saleh's second in charge of the defense last year. And the Niners, many thought he was going to hire them. They basically had him primed to be the candidate unless they could find someone better, like maybe a Jim Schwartz or, whoever. But the Niners end up losing Gus Bradley to follow along with Saleh. But this is after they announced that Raheem Morris will be the new defensive coordinator of the Niners. That's a home run hire for the 49ers for a few reasons. One, he was just the head coach of the Falcons and went 8-9. Only, tied for their divisional lead. And so he has that great experience right there, too. He did a great job with the Falcons defense, improving them last year. So this guy has defensive coordinator experience. He's been a head coach for the Buccaneers and the Falcons. Did a decent job last year, 8-9. And so getting him as a coordinator is great. It's also great because he already had the previous stint with the Buccaneers. Not many guys get 3 head coach opportunities. So he's not a dude who you'd expect necessarily to be getting a head coaching job next year. And he's young. So this is a coordinator that, if he's successful, the Niners could potentially have for 3 or more years, which is exactly what teams want. Have the Spagnuolo who you can sustain the success with. So many of these successful teams are losing their coordinators year in and year out, and it's very, very difficult to keep having a high level of talent coming in, but also just to have the same continuity if you're starting from scratch. New playbook or new terminology or new relationships, new preferences, all these things. It's way easier to sustain things if you're keeping the vast majority of the cast, the same offense, the same playbook, the same terminology, the same leader, and then just, okay, we'll add a wide receiver or alignment, whatever, and new guys come in, but the crew stays the same. That's huge. So could Raheem Morris become a head coach again? Sure. He's young. He didn't do that bad. He's considered a great defensive coach, and so he could be. But there's a good chance that he's not, or not in the next couple of years. And if the Niners could retain a solid defensive coordinator for multiple years, that would be a huge benefit to them. It's also a huge strength for them because he has that head coaching experience. It's also a huge strength for them because he's coached, this will be his 4th stint coaching with Kyle Shanahan in the NFL. They started together in Tampa Bay 20 years ago as assistant coaches under John Gruden. The story came out of Kyle Shanahan and him getting arrested together because they were drunk at the combine late at night, and Kyle believed that cops were racially profiling Raheem Morris, so he stood up for him and got arrested with him. So they obviously go back a long time, 20 plus years, half their lives. They've coached together before. The schemes can align there, and he's a guy they could have for multiple years, and he's young. So that's basically an A hire for the Niners, a defensive coordinator, and I'm glad that they got him over Gus Bradley, who would have been fine, but certainly wasn't a sexy look. Philly hired a new offensive coordinator. Jalen Hurts will have another coordinator again, and that will be Sean Mannion as offensive coordinator. He came from Green Bay, and he was the quarterbacks coach there, and he's a previous backup quarterback in the NFL not that many years ago under Sean McVay in the Rams. So I believe Oregon State. So we will see how Sean Mannion can do. That's a big hire because there is somewhat of a hot seat for Nick Sirianni with Eagles fans. We'll see if the front office feels the same way, but that's far from a sure situation there. Their offensive line regressed. Saquon Barkley regressed. Jalen Hurts is now having his 5th coordinator in 5 years. So A.J. Brown could be on the outs or could still be upset. So that's going to be a big hire there. And if that flops, that could cost Sirianni his job, which coming 1 year off a Super Bowl, I think that's a bit extreme. But I'd also say it's different when they're not running the offense or the defense. Like, you want to keep the Mike McDonald. You want to keep the Kyle Shanahan when they're, making it to Super Bowls and stuff, because they're the strength of the team. But Sirianni really isn't the strength of the team. You could let Vic Fangio fucking do probably just about as good a job as a head coach and still run the defense there. So it's key that he lands this offensive hire in order to maintain his status quo in Philadelphia and not start getting on a hot seat with the front office. Especially since he picked his buddy Kevin Patullo to be the offensive coordinator last year, and that was seen as a major failure. Vikings fired their general manager as well, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, and that to me, I gotta think, like, he didn't draft any Pro Bowlers in his 4 years there, but I gotta think that has to do with how he handled the quarterback position. That's the most important position. If the Niners didn't have Brock Purdy, they would still be talking about how the Trey Lance trade is a top 10 worst trade of all time. But because they landed the quarterback, that's basically kept John Lynch looking good rather than bad for what was a horrendous trade for the 49ers and what set them back significantly, spending 3 first-round picks on a player who never positively contributed to their team. But the Vikings last year were the number 2 seed in the NFC. They played in the final week for the number 1 seed in the NFC and lost to the Lions with Sam Darnold getting embarrassed. And then again, not winning their playoff game with Sam Darnold not having a good game. So they moved on from Sam Darnold. But after the Giants cut Daniel Jones last year, they had him as well. They let Daniel Jones go to the Colts, and obviously their season ended up disappointing, but they started off 7-1 behind Daniel Jones in the offense, and Sam Darnold is now in the Super Bowl throwing for 346 yards and 3 touchdowns in the NFC Championship game, and the Vikings feel like they're a quarterback away, and they had horrendous quarterback play this year. Not only did he let Darnold go, and now he's in the Super Bowl, but he also drafted J.J. McCarthy top 10, which if you've been a listener of Big Dawg Sports Unleashed, you know that I think is one of the worst draft picks I've seen in the last decade. The dude never even was baller in college, averaged under 200 passing yards a game in college, was carried by a head coach, an elite defense, and an elite running back in college, and they took him in the top 10. That was a horrendous pick. He's shown no reason to believe that he's going to be super successful there. Yes, it is still early, but when you feel like you have a potential Super Bowl contender without the quarterback, that doesn't make you want to wait around for a dude playing horrible and posting some awful performances and who's already had like 4 different fucking injuries. So now with a new regime coming in, that could mean the end of J.J. McCarthy. I expect him to be on the Vikings next year, but I also expect them to want to add another veteran quarterback that they want McCarthy to beat out, and he won't. And that gets us to Mac Jones, because Mac Jones could be a guy that Kevin O'Connell may want to bring in there to compete with. So I do think the Niners are going to have a lot of suitors for Mac Jones, and they should be able to get at least a 2nd and a 5th for him, if not more, or be able to trade him for a Garrett Wilson or, a wide receiver or a solid player in that regard. But yeah, they should be getting more than a 2nd round pick, potentially a 1st or a 2nd and a mid-round pick as well. I mean, the Vikings are a team that may be interested in that because the new regime didn't pick J.J. McCarthy, so they don't need to try and make it work out. They can just be like, that guy sucked. Dumb that he picked him. This is my regime now. But he should be on the team. But I expect it won't be too hard to find a veteran to beat him out. Finally, the other 2 big hires that have happened is the last 2 teams of 10 to hire their head coach were the Arizona Cardinals and the Las Vegas Raiders, and both in the last few days have been announced that they haven't been able to hire them yet, but it's announced that the Cardinals are going to hire Mike LaFleur, brother of Matt LaFleur, the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. So we've got some brothers coaching in the NFL now, in addition to the Harbaughs as head coaches. And speaking of brothers, the Las Vegas Raiders plan to hire Clint Kubiak, the Seahawks offensive coordinator, to be their head coach. Clay Kubiak, his brother, is the offensive coordinator of the 49ers under Kyle Shanahan, and he turned down some interviews as well. So that could be another brother. Next year or the year after could be more brothers. We could have the Harbaughs, and we could have the LaFleurs, and we could have the Kubiaks all as head coaches in the NFL in due time, because the Raiders are expected to hire Clint Kubiak. I think that's a great call for them to go offense, because I think that is the harder thing to make great right now. They have the number 1 overall pick. It's all but certain they're going to take Fernando Mendoza, and you need to do the best job you can of getting your young quarterback and your number 1 overall pick a chance to succeed. Getting one of the best offensive minds that's young in the game would do that, and getting him as a coordinator is one thing, but if they ball out as a coordinator, they're going to be gone in 1 or 2 years when 10 fucking teams fire their head coaches again. But if you had him as the head coach, then you're guaranteed to keep him there basically as long as you want. So I think that's a fantastic hire to be for the Raiders, giving Fernando Mendoza, their future number 1 overall pick, the best chance to succeed. He's also very young, and he's done a great job with Sam Darnold this year. So definitely deserves a head coaching opportunity. So good hire for the Raiders, considering they were one of the last two teams to hire the head coach. Is starting to think, they better be waiting for someone on these Super Bowl teams, or just no one want to go there, or they can't make up their minds. But I expect that to be a very good hire for them. Mike LaFleur, not quite sure as well. We don't have as much idea about how successful he'll be. He's been in the NFL for a while. He had coached with the Niners previously. I believe him and Robert Saleh were like each other's best man, so they're close. But he comes as being the offensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. But obviously, everyone knows that's Sean McVay's show there. He's the real offensive coordinator. It's his system. But obviously, this guy knows the system as well as anyone now, since he's been helping him run it and been there for a while. So another Shanahan and McVay disciple. People were trying to hire Shanahan's offensive coordinator. They hired Shanahan's defensive coordinator. They hired Sean McVay's offensive coordinator. They hired Clint Kubiak, who's coached with both of those guys before in that scheme. So you see, that these coaching trees of Shanahan and McVay continue to be plucked with all these guys around the league connected to them, having worked under them and with them. So it's interesting that they are, kind of the preeminent, heads of the current offensive coaching trees in the NFL. Though that's good news for the 49ers, though, because both these guys are getting poached. From the Rams, it doesn't make that big of a difference. It does make some, absolutely, because you don't want to lose coaching talent, and he did play an important role there. But as we mentioned, Sean McVay staying, their offense is going to have about the same potential, and also it's not a quarterback that's more as prone to huge swings in how they're going to perform. It's not a Sam Darnold or a young quarterback where a great coordinator could make or break them. Ben Johnson with Caleb Williams. When you have Matt Stafford, a future Hall of Famer and top 10 potential quarterback of all time, with two of the top 5 receivers in the league, and Sean McVay still there for a decade now, that's not a huge loss for the Rams. It is a loss, no doubt. But compared to the Seahawks losing Clint Kubiak, much larger loss, because that's the whole infrastructure of their offense. They now need to start basically completely fresh, most likely, with someone much less established or an entirely new scheme, which then drastically compromises the ability of Sam Darnold, who's been, had a whole bunch of different offensive outputs in this league, to continue his success if he's learning a new scheme and a new system, a new terminology, new relationships. So good for the Niners in the sense that those two got poached. So that's been this episode of Big Dawg Sports Unleashed. We covered our recap of the 2 championship games, the boring Blizzard game, 10-7, and the great game between the Rams and the Seahawks. We finished 6-6 in our predictions, which is certainly poorer than I expected after the hot start in the wild card round. I'm going to go ahead and take the Patriots plus 4.5. I know the Seahawks are great. Their defense has been awesome. I'll roll with the 5 straight underdogs covering the spread. And although I think the Seahawks definitely should be favorites and wouldn't be surprised if they won, it is a game where I believe the Patriots are good enough. They're well coached. Vrabel has a lot of Super Bowl experience, and McDaniels has a lot of Super Bowl experience. Despite the low numbers, I think Drake May can play very well, and the Seahawks defense may be, expecting a little luck to come back against them. So I will take the 4.5 points, since unsure on the matchup, not overly confident in the Seahawks. The final pick of the playoffs to see if we have above a 500 or below 500 betting record will be the Patriots plus 4.5. And I'm going tails on the coin toss. So we'll see about that. And thank you for listening to this episode of Big Dawg Sports Unleashed. We'll be going a little less frequent with the episodes in the off season, but still expect an episode every 2 weeks with any news that's happening on the rest of the coaching carousel, any off season rule changes. A bunch of draft stuff will come out, and eventually some fantasy coverage. So we'll be back still with regular football content. If there's anything in the off season that you're dying to hear takes on, or that you think we need to cover, send us the DM on Instagram and we'll make it happen. So this has been this episode of Big Dawg Sports Unleashed, and go Patriots in the Super Bowl on Sunday to complete an epic football season.